Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome fellow and sister board members. Welcome members of the public. Welcome Department of Justice staff. We are here for the RIPA policies subcommittee meeting, and we have a lot to get through. But before we get started, how about we invite the board members to introduce themselves briefly, and I will start with Rich Randolph. Mr. Randolph, if you'd like to introduce yourself. All right, I'll come back to you. Lily Kajavi.
Thank you. It's great to be here today. I'm looking forward to our policy subcommittee meeting. My name is Lily Kajavi. I'm a professor in Los Angeles in the Mathematics, Statistics, and Data Science Department at Loyola Marymount University, and an appointee of the Attorney General's Office. Thank you.
Great. John Dobard, our illustrious co-chair.
Good afternoon, everyone. John Dobard, he, him, his, Vice President of Policy and Programs at Catalyst California, and an appointee of Speaker Emeritus Anthony Rendon.
Great. And I'm just taking a look to see who else is on the call. And Rich Randolph, if you are back, I invite you to introduce yourself. Okay, I'll go ahead.
We are waiting. There may be some technical difficulties. Board member Sierra is also on the call.
Okay. All right. Angela Sierra, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Angela Sierra. I'm an attorney with the Civil Rights Enforcement Section at the Department of Justice, and I am Attorney General Rob Bonta's designee on the board.
Okay, wonderful. All right. Department of Justice staff, if you could help me, do we have, other than Rich Randolph, do we have another board member on the call?
No, we don't. And I see that board member Randolph is back on the call.
Okay, great. Mr. Randolph, would you like to introduce yourself?
I apologize. Rich Randolph, board member. Good morning or good afternoon. Rich Randolph, Chief of Police, Cuesta College, representing PORAC.
Great, great. Okay, and I'm Andrea Guerrero. I'm the Executive Director at Alliance San Diego. I am an appointee of Senate President Pro Tem Tony Atkins and the co-chair along with John Dobard of this committee. I'll be facilitating this committee meeting today. Okay, well, our very first action is regarding the agenda. The Department of Justice has proposed an amended agenda. We are to review it and take a vote on it and see if we would like to adopt the amended agenda, which is in your meeting materials for today. And I'll give you a second to take a look at that and invite a motion to adopt the amended agenda.
I'd like to move that we adopt the amended agenda.
Wonderful. Do we have a second?
I will second that.
Okay. Department of Justice, would you like to run a vote?
It's board member Randall.
Yes.
Board member Kajabi.
Aye. Yes.
Board member Sierra.
Aye.
Co-chair Dobard.
Aye.
And co-chair Guerrero.
Aye.
Thank you. The ayes have it.
Wonderful. Okay, so taking a look at the amended agenda, we will be hearing from we need to review the minutes, but then we'll be hearing from the Department of Justice on on a debrief of the last meeting, and then a discussion of the policy section that's been drafted, and hopefully you've had a chance to review that. It's a little over 20 pages, not too long. Then take a break, a little further discussion, and then we will invite public comment. I do want to let everyone know that we do have a new board member, not able to join us today, but a new board member, and I'm not sure I know how to say her name. If somebody could help me from Department of Justice.
Sure. It's Amina Kazi.
Kazi. Wonderful. And so Ms. Kazi, Amina Kazi won't be joining us today, but she is an appointee of Attorney General Rob Bonta. She's a movement lawyer and community advocate, currently serving as co-executive director of the Peace and Justice Law Center, an Orange County-based nonprofit legal organization committed to promoting community safety by combating state violence, reducing entanglement with the criminal system, legal system, and dismantling inequities in the criminal legal system and policing policies and practices. So she will join us at our next meeting, but I did want to let everyone know that we have a full committee now, which is very exciting. So let's turn to the March 14th subcommittee meeting minutes. I'll give everyone a chance to take a look at those. And when you're ready, I will invite a motion to approve those minutes. I'm going to step away just for a second to get a new pen. Would anyone like to make a motion to accept the March 14th minutes?
I will move to accept the minutes.
I'll second.
Wonderful. DOJ, would you like to run a vote?
Co-chair Guerrero,
Aye.
co-chair Dilbar,
Aye.
board member Kajabi,
Aye.
board member Randolph,
Aye.
and board member Sierra.
Aye.
Thank you. The ayes have it. The minutes are approved.
Okay, great. All right. So moving on, we wanted to hold some space in the agenda to debrief our last subcommittee meeting. We did have a robust conversation with law enforcement leaders from California Highway Patrol and the Los Angeles Police Department, and we just wanted to hold space. Department of Justice staff, I didn't know if you wanted to say anything in particular about that meeting or just create space for a conversation.
Primarily, we wanted to create an opportunity for the board members to have a discussion about that event if they chose to do so, and to also determine if there are any instructions or any directions that the board members would have for the DOJ coming out of that meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Gibson. I want to open it up if anyone wants to offer any reflections on that meeting. If you were present or you had the opportunity to see it afterwards. And this is for board members. It was a conversation with LAPD personnel and CHP personnel who shared what they're doing around consent searches and stops, and how they are approaching the issue of discretionary stops. It was a rich discussion. I appreciated their engagement with us. Angela.
Yes, thank you. No, I did really appreciate it as well. And I thought it was really helpful in reading the minutes, because I thought it was great that we have a lot of the substantive content in the minutes to help refresh kind of my memory and looking at my notes, to have those different agencies, given that they have, you know, somewhat different priorities, you know, given CHP, what their mission is versus a law enforcement agency like LAPD. So kind of seeing where there's similarities and where there's differences and what might be the justification for those. The one thing for me that would be helpful as a follow-up, and we probably already have these, but especially with the LAPD's discussion, there were references to their policies. And I know we have them, but as I was reading the minutes, I thought it'd be really helpful to review those actual policies again. So I don't know if that's something that we can circulate to all the members of the subcommittee, or even have if there's a link, just to make sure that we're looking at, or I'm looking at the correct ones, or the most up-to-date policies. Because there were a few places where I was getting a little confused, you know, and I wanted to see what exactly the policy was saying. But I thought it was really great. I thought, you know, the CHP, you know, they found a lot of success in what they're doing, and, you know, and thinking that it could be a model or a potential model. So I thought it was very helpful. I think it'd be great if, you know, to weave some of this into our report. But again, I just felt like I needed to actually see the actual policies as well, which,
Right.
Yeah, so
Right.
that was great, but I really appreciate the DOJ staff for putting that together. So I thought that was really helpful.
Great. Member Kajabi?
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, it was a very rich discussion. It was interesting to hear also contrast somewhat in approaches between the two agencies. And so to piggyback on Board Member Sierra's request, CHP is using a form for consent searches now, they mentioned. And even though those forms aren't, you know, different agencies across the country have tried them in various ways, they're not a panacea. They don't sort of do all and end all when it comes to consent searches. It was mentioned that we could get a copy, and I think that would be, I hope, not too big a follow-up request. I don't know if someone from DOJ can follow up with CHP to get a copy of the form, just so we could get a little more of a window in. Their concern search numbers, have dropped, you know, really much more than other agencies. So I think it could be useful to get that window into how they're implementing things. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think what was incredibly informative from CHP was that they were requiring probable cause in order to conduct searches with limited exceptions. And in those limited exceptions, such as a write-off from the highway, where they were needing to do pat-downs, they were engaging in a process to get consent. So that was very helpful. We also heard from LAPD that they were using body-worn cameras to record conversations in the pretext stop scenario, whether there was consent or not. And so I think, you know, they take two different approaches, right? Like essentially CHP has eliminated pretext stops by requiring probable cause, except in limited circumstances. LAPD still allows for pretext stops with some limitations. They're two different approaches. And I think they also have data that they are generating off of their new policy, and it's still early yet to see what that data produces. So we'll see more on that in the coming year or two.
Yeah, that's a great characterization of the two. Thank you.
Any other thoughts or reflections? And while you're thinking about it, I'll just add that it was really great to hear from people in the field, from law enforcement practitioners about what they're doing, what they think works, what they think doesn't work, and that led to some deep thinking and rich discussion. And we're going to try to do a lot more of that. So it's not just us talking to each other, but hearing from people. And we'll, in fact, our next board meeting, full board meeting, we'll have more folks coming in. Any final thoughts? Department of Justice staff, do you have any final thoughts before we move on?
No, other than we will follow up with a request for additional information and provide that to the board members
Okay.
and the public.
Wonderful. All right. So the next agenda item is a discussion of the policy section of the draft 2025 report. And I believe DOJ, you're going to run us through just a big picture overview of the report. Is that right? Or are we going to jump right in?
Yes, Co-Chair Guerrero. And I wanted to introduce the team who has been doing so much great work on this section of the report and working really hard on providing a comprehensive draft. And I'm going to start with Anna Rick, and then she'll popcorn over to the rest of the team.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Co-Chairs Guerrero and Dobard. I have had the pleasure of working with all of the subcommittee members over the past few years. My name is Anna Rick. My pronouns are she, her. I'm one of the non-attorneys working on this team with the Attorney General's office to support the work of the board. I'd introduce myself a little bit more for the members of the public who may not have been at all of the previous meetings of the subcommittee. 3 years ago, I worked with this subcommittee to develop the board's work to address the profiling of transgender people. And then over the last 2 years, I supported the board's work to address the profiling of students in K through 12 public schools. And really grateful for the opportunity to continue supporting the board's work. And one of the joys in my work this year is the team here in the department that I have the chance to work with. I encourage you to use us fully as resources. I get to work with the following talented and thoughtful people: Alexander Simpson, Anthony Jackson, and Garrett Lindsay. And I'd like Alex to introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for allowing me to be a part of this wonderful team. My name is Alex Simpson. I am one of the attorneys in Department of Justice assigned to the policy section for this year. This is actually my first RIPA report, and really very excited to be a part of it. I'm going to keep my comments brief because I'm just getting over a bit of a head cold, excuse me, and I am the one who's going to be presenting on what the draft of this report entails for this year. So I'm going to try and save my voice, excuse me, and I'm going to popcorn it over to Tony Jackson. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Alex. I think you guys know me pretty well. I've been with the RIPA team now for years. I've done work the past on diversity in hiring, work in looking at hiring and examining and providing a analysis for background checks. Recently, some mental health, negative interactions with youth and others, how that has an impact on those individuals, and doing something similar here with the policies team. Also doing some work on the complaints team, but doing something similar with the policies team. So I'm going to be looking at the negative avoiding negative, how youth can avoid negative interactions and what sort of investments can be made into community, disenfranchised community, to reduce these sort of so that I guess I will pass it back to you, or Chair Guerrero. Is that right? Or no, I'm sorry. I'll pass it on to Alex.
Thank you so much again. Okay. All right, sorry, it was just as you heard just recently from Chair Guerrero, I am going to be going over an overview of this year's draft and walk the board through the draft sections of the report. And I just encourage the board has any questions or areas of consideration that you believe DOJ should focus on, to please let us know. So this is going to be a kind of broad overview of the draft that you've been provided. In prior reports, the board has examined the school to prison pipeline and has made a number of recommendations aimed at reducing unnecessary interactions between students and police. The board has also made recommendations aimed at reducing racial disparities in the initiation of and the results of those school interactions. However, while the board has studied and made recommendations to eliminate the profiling of students in K through 12 schools, the RIPA data shows that the majority of stops of youth occur in other settings. So the policy section of this year's report will focus on the issue of youth and policing within the broader community and the concerns those interactions have raised. They'll expand the board's prior discussion, analysis, and recommendations to address the enduring issue of racial and identity profiling of youth by police. The policy section will be broken down into 4 primary areas. First section is a section detailing the research into how youth are uniquely impacted by police encounters. This section, for those of you following along at home, appears on pages 2 through 8 of the draft report. So in looking at that section broadly, generally speaking, researchers have concluded that contact with law enforcement, including simply being stopped by police, could have long-term consequences on youth, including higher levels of delinquency, fewer educational and employment opportunities, and negative attitudes. This is especially problematic when it comes to racialized youth, who are more likely to live in areas with a heavier police presence, meaning they experience a greater likelihood of police contact than white youth who live in less policed neighborhoods. I apologize. I'm not trying to drag this out. I'm trying to fight off this cough here. Apologize. So that's the first section of the policy section. The second section is a section detailing the demographics of the youth that are interacting with police in California. And this section appears on pages 8 through 11 of the draft report. This section will use the RIPA data to explain how racial disparities in stop rates and actions taken by officers during stops of individuals in younger age groups are larger than the disparities for older age groups. And DOJ is still receiving and compiling the most recent data for this section. This section will also look at disparities in stops for status offenses, search rates, general result of stop data, and disparities when officers report no reportable action taken. For the board's edification, DOJ is prepared to look into additional information regarding the demographics of youth stopped by police if the board believes it would be valuable. So 2 areas that the board reviewed and emphasized in prior reports relate to the LGBTQ+ demographic and the demographic relating to youth with disabilities. DOJ is also developing a portion of this section relating to hotspot policing strategy under broken windows theory, and which is often used for tackling disorder. We would invite the board to consider whether it wants DOJ to focus this portion of the report on hotspot policing, broken windows theory, and their relation to youth interactions with police. There's a third broad section of the report starting on pages 12 and ending on page 18 of the draft report that details existing policies relating to police interactions with youth. And so this section will review the policies and practices promulgated in Wave 1 and 2 agencies, so the 16 largest agencies in California, and Lexipol, as they relate to youth and policing. As you can see in the draft report, this section will focus primarily on policies relating to the use of force and police interviews of youth. But if the board has other policy areas that you would like DOJ to review, please let us know. And the fourth and final section of the draft report is a section looking forward to the creation of developmentally appropriate responses to police interaction with youth. And that's on pages 18 to 21 of the draft report. So this section will include the board's recommendations for this year and looking to the prior recommendations from prior years in this area. And if you'll look to pages 11, 20, and 21 of the draft report, you can see that the board has made 10 prior recommendations in this space. So previously, and in fact, in the last report, apologies, the board recommended that policymakers and law enforcement agencies prohibit the collection of field interview cards and entries of youth into CalGang or other databases after youth are questioned or a field interview is conducted without the presence of an attorney. The board also recommended in the last report that if an agency does not adopt the previous recommendation, the agency should have a written policy stating that these encounters may not be fully consensual, and officers should be required to inform youth that are subject to a field interview that they do not have to respond to questions and are free to leave at any time. Other recommendations from the board are that policymakers should consider providing youth with additional protections prior to waiving any rights, particularly if statements they make could lead to their inclusion in a criminal database or could be used against them. Another recommendation is that policymakers and law enforcement agencies should prohibit or limit supervision inquiries during stops. That is, asking whether the stopped youth is under a form of supervision. Another recommendation is that officers should be prohibited from detaining or searching youth simply because an officer is aware of the person's supervision status, recommending that the officer should instead, at a minimum, have a reasonable suspicion the person is engaged in criminal activity. Another recommendation from the board previously is that policymakers should consider requiring officers to have probable cause prior to conducting a search of youth, or taking measures to prohibit officers from requesting consent to search youth without an attorney present. Another recommendation from the board is that law enforcement agencies and post should provide scenario-based training on the law, prohibiting officers from conducting a frisk for weapons or pat-down during an investigatory stop, except where officers have reasonable suspicion based on articulable facts that a person is armed with a dangerous and deadly weapon, and provide scenario-based training regarding Terry versus Ohio frisks or pat searches. And last recommendation from the board previously is that policymakers should reform the use of force policies and practices to take into account the physical and developmental differences between youth and adults. So as we develop this section, we asked the board to consider what policy recommendations it would like the DOJ to research and incorporate into the next draft of this report. Overall, the goal of the policy section in this year's report is to explain how police policies should be used to reduce or eliminate racial and identity profiling. Effective policies can increase public safety and reduce profiling, and the board should encourage or endorse such policies going forward. Ineffective policies may decrease public safety and contribute to or exacerbate existing issues with racial and identity profiling, and the board should identify those policies so that they can be eliminated from police practices going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. I appreciate the work that you and your colleagues have done on this first draft. This is an initial draft. There's lots of notations here on sections that are still yet to be developed. And so we're going to see the draft start to take shape and evolve, get filled in. But this is the first pass that the subcommittee has to review, offer any suggestions to the DOJ staff. And after we hear from board members, we will also hear from members of the public. So I want to open it up to any thoughts, reflections, suggestions that that board members might have. And if you need a minute, I have some, so how about I get started? Okay, so a few things. On page 9, at the end of the first paragraph, that provides some demographic information about U.S. youth. That is a data point from 2011, and it's about the United States. If it's relevant to understanding the information in the paragraph, then perhaps we can just embed it into a footnote, but it is I don't know that we need it in the body of the report, because it is not California specific, and it is from 2011. So I would suggest taking that out, and if it's needed for context, then put it into a footnote. So my second suggestion, well, it wasn't a suggestion as much as a question. I think I know the answer to this. On page 12, there in the chart of law enforcement policies that relate to youth, we have a listing of agencies. I believe those are Wave 1 agencies, or the largest agencies. If DOJ staff could clarify that. And also what you're hoping to convey in this chart. Is it that these entities, these agencies have policies or not? Or are we actually going to be taking a look at those policies to understand what they say? I don't
So
know if
as-
DOJ wants to weigh in on that now.
I'm happy to answer both of those questions. As to the first question, you are correct that the chart is it's wave 1 and wave 2 agencies. And unfortunately, just the way that the formatting works is that some of those wave 2 agencies appear on the next page. That the chart does encompass wave 1 and wave 2 agencies plus Lexipol. And the purpose of the chart was to put together a chart of whether or not those agencies had policies in particular areas. And I talked about use of force and policies relating to youth interviews. But that chart, the purpose of the chart was to demonstrate here are the and again, this is incomplete, right? Some of the things that we wanted to make sure is if the board had recommendations about policies that it also wanted DOJ to include in the chart, that we could put that in there as well.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think, I mean, my suggestion would be if we are covering ground on other things, field interview cards, gang databases, anything that we're covering in the draft section, that if those show up as policies, that would be good to know. And then it would also be good to know good for us to have like a reading of those by DOJ staff so that there's some sort of qualitative look at those policies. I mean, it's one thing to say, yes, I have a youth interview policy, but that could be, apples and oranges from another policy, or at least describing, some text that describes what a youth interview policy is, or, what it is in the context of these agencies that we are looking at. And these are policies that are readily available, or you would be going out and asking the agencies to provide these policies for review?
Right. So as to that as to that last point, the policies that we had looked at, and we had this chart is really only proof of concept, right? I just want to make sure that that's not that is not Lexipol is the only one that has a policy, and then no other data. But what we were looking for is to at least demonstrate that this is how the structure of it works. But describing with text what the agency's policy is and whether and the explanation of what that policy might do, I understand. So thank you.
Yeah, because I know in the past we have gone to agencies, said, hey, can we take a look at your this, that, and the other policy? And then we've read through them, and not we, the board members, but you, the DOJ staff, have read through them and then kind of summarized the scope of the policies that currently exist. So for this chart to have any value, I would want to make sure that one, that you give yourself enough time to ask for those policies, or determine whether they're available or not, because that has been an obstacle for us in the past, just time. And two, that it's not just a chart, but that there's a narrative that follows that describes the scope of the policies that exist for these agencies. So that is a suggestion. I only have a few more suggestions, and then I'd love to hear from fellow board members. My next suggestion is on page 14 at the top of the page. The second paragraph discusses, it says, despite numerous protections for children under the law, there are no laws that specifically limit or prohibit law enforcement from using force against children. And that the decision to impose limits on use of force is left to the individual agencies. I think that needs to be further developed, because the state of California has use of force laws that apply universally, and we talked about that last year. In fact, there's a new-ish law that limits use of force, lethal use of force, to necessary. And then there are international treaties that we have signed and ratified as the United States. We referenced that in our last report, and namely the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which limits the use of force to that which is necessary and proportional. So there are limits that we should recognize, we already have, and we should underscore here in this section of the report. That would be my recommendation. And then I think I just have one more suggestion on page 15. The first paragraph on page 15 talks about a 2021 bill, the Juvenile Deceptions Bill. And then the following paragraph, it talks about the bill being passed in 2022. So I think we just need to get clarity on whether this bill was passed in 21 or 22. The first two, to make sure that the first and second paragraph are not confusing. Okay, so I did have one more recommendation, and that was on page 18. At the top of the page, there's a section that begins consent searches, and then a paragraph, and that paragraph ends with a sentence. Some scholars have suggested that because of disparities and lack of voluntariness in agreeing to a search, officers should be required to have probable cause prior to conducting a search of anyone, but especially of youth. This is an area where we have made recommendations before, as alluded to further down in the report, but I think it's worth stating here in this section where we're talking about this, what the RIPA board has already said about consent searches. I think that's it. I'll leave it there. So I'll open it up to other board members who suggestions, thoughts, recommendations.
I have a couple of recommendations.
Great. Go ahead, John.
And I'll start by just saying I appreciate the current structure of this. So I like the flow and the structure so far. My first recommendation, it relates to the section on impact on youth, the impact of police contact. So in terms of understanding that, there's a report that Catalyst California put out in March that may be useful. The report examines gang profiling in Southeast San Diego, and it relies on RIPA data. It also uses first-person narratives, and those first-person narratives talk a lot about people's experiences as youth. So there are folks that are adults now, but they talk about their first encounters with police. And so you start to get some perspective by listening to those first-person accounts. So I recommend reviewing that and seeing if there may be some information that can help underscore some of the points that are made in the report now. The other recommendation is about policy. So in addition to use of force and youth interviews, I recommend that you all look at youth diversion. So it'd be good to know what policies these departments have when it comes to youth diversion. And that's it.
Thank you. Angela?
Yes, thank you. one recommendation I have is that I thought this chapter, and I think it's chock full of really important and interesting information, both from the demographics, the impact, and I really thought was very powerful and important was a discussion about stereotyping and how bias, the issues around bias with youth, the adultification, and other issues that are discussed in this chapter. So I was thinking that those areas, I mean, we have made, very important recommendations already on a number of the issues we're touching upon, which I think this year's report is going to further support. But one area I thought, in terms of what we're going to recommend any training with respect to youth, some of the information in this report regarding bias, I think could be really important to suggest that be included. And so whether we overlap with the subcommittee on this with respect to the post-training or just tee it up for that, I think that could be very useful. And I was also very interested in how we are looking at these national studies, given that we are going to have our California statistics in here. It'll be really interesting to see to what extent we diverge or not from some of what the national statistics look like. So that's all I have for now. And I do very much agree, if we could add to that chart about the field interview cards and the gang database, because to me, if we are going to do some further work on that in those areas, it would be great to identify some policies and maybe bring in some of those agencies to talk to us about those policies, down the road. We probably won't be able to do it for this year, but that might be for the next year.
Great.
So
Lily?
that's all I have for now.
Go ahead, Lily.
Thank you. I really appreciated all of the comments that have been made so far, and also that this draft is starts out with really rich arguments about why it's important to focus on youth. One small piece that could be added to those first, maybe it's pages 4 or 5, where there's just sort of general background of the impact on youth with encounters for law enforcement. There's some work around absenteeism and police contact, unfortunately, inadvertently having a negative impact on school attendance, which I know isn't the intention of law enforcement. But Amanda Geller has some work. I think she's at UC Irvine now. So, and Amanda Geller, someone you cited for some other one of her other papers. I don't have it in front of me, but it's listed in many of the footnotes. But the same researcher, but on absenteeism and encounters with law enforcement. And then also my main questions, I think, were about the table. Those have already been raised about what items the table might address. And in particular, could there be some nuance about what it's capturing, which I think will come through the next steps already outlined. Thank you.
Great. Any other reflections? Go ahead, Rich.
Thank you, Andrea. I just wanted to thank Andrea and John for, first of all, DOJ, great report, a lot of details. I wish I would have got more time to digest it. There's quite a bit in there. John, thank you so much for talking about diversion, because diversion is a huge part of law enforcement contact now. Actually, I can tell you it is the point of contact of diversion. No handcuffs, no juvenile hall. Let's go another route and let's work together with the families and get to the root of how we got here with that law enforcement officer, SRO, or whoever is called, whether it's on the streets or it's at the schools. Some things that I did, however, there were some concerns I wanted to talk about. Alex talked about, we talked about some policies as far as reasonable suspicion and making contact with youth. And we wanted to recommend that to post. Those are already covered. All this is already covered during Learning Domains 21 and Learning Domains 16 already for law enforcement. That is already covered. There were some other concerns I had also when we talked about the RIPA data from last year. I know we had talked about, and that it just kind of, we threw it out and then it just kind of got forgotten. And the big concern, statewide and assembly members I've spoken to is there's not a really, when we collected data last year, the 300 contacts, I'll just throw out 300 for one law enforcement agency. Those were 300 contacts. Some of them were citations, they were contacts, but they were not placed in handcuffs. They were not placed in the back of a police car. And in a lot of agencies, there's not a streamlined base of reporting. Ridgecrest is doing things differently than San Diego. Everyone's doing things differently than Berkeley. So I think we need to get that clarified as we really dive into the youth of law enforcement. And I really do stress that. That is so important as we focus on those numbers from last year. Andrea, thank you so much for commenting about outside sources, outside things outside the California, because we are streamlined. We are moving forward on things. And one thing I noticed, page 13, there was a quote in there. Bold as can be. 19 children were killed by law enforcement in California. The link's to the Washington Post. I clicked on the link. It's a bad link. I'd like to see where they source that, because I've done my research and I'm not finding that. And I'd like to research all 19. And I'd like to find out what those agencies were and what actually did happen with those contacts. So I'm really glad that we're opening the dialogue. Like Angela said, also, there's a lot of dialogue, and I'm just glad that we're able to start opening up and just being a little bit more open-minded as we dive into this. Because I can tell you, I've spoken to several school districts, officials, and law enforcement agencies up and down the state, and yes, and I am concerned when we're talking about old, archaic outlines as far as broken windows, 50 years old, prison to pipeline, people aren't going to prison anymore. In our juvenile hall system, I mean, we pretty much have altered our context with juveniles now. There are different programs. Instead of us placing handcuffs on them, there's different ways to handle it. And I'm glad, and we in California have pioneered that. And I think we need to highlight that a little bit more, us as a RIPA board. That was it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Board Member Randolph, if I could draw out a little bit more of your first point. You said that there are different approaches on youth, which we all recognize. Did you have a recommendation for DOJ on how to visibilize that, or?
I'm sorry, Andrea, you totally got me. I scrambled on, I jumped on the next subject. So yes, and it wasn't just youth, it's the probable cause and reasonable suspicion. That is all outlined in Patrol Procedures Learning Domain 21 and 16. So I just did want DOJ to spin their wheels on, they can actually just focus on that learning domain, because it does outline. I mean, I just can't just drive down the street and make contact with a juvenile based on their race. I have to establish a probable cause. And yes, I have to let them know why I stopped them. So, and if there's reasonable suspicion there, and that is all outlined in LD 21 and LD 16. So I just wanted to throw that out there. It wasn't just youth, that's all contacts. So, and obviously as we start doing the networking with Post, I think that's something also we could expand on as well in those two learning domains.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Okay, before we turn to the public, I want to see how we're doing. Do we have other thoughts? Excuse me. Okay, well, we are cooking along and we are scheduled to take a break, but I want to ask if it's okay with board members if we press forward. Is that okay? Okay, so let's press forward. So we've talked about the policy section of the draft report, and before we do move into public comment, big picture, stepping back, are we covering all the ground that we want to cover? Understanding that we don't want to do too much. We are in a year of a smaller report, hopefully, than last year. This section does already cover a lot of ground, but are there any big things that are still missing? You know, youth diversion has been elevated in particular, the issue of absenteeism, and other things that have been stated here. But anything else that we should add, now would be a good time before DOJ works on a second round draft. Any questions from the DOJ staff about the recommendations or suggestions made by board members? And of course, you can always reach out individually to us if you want to follow up or you need a little more information.
I don't have any questions. I don't want to speak on behalf of the entire team because the team is spectacular. But I really do thank the board members for all of their comments, suggestions, recommendations, for some of the typos that have been discovered. It's all very, very helpful, and I really do appreciate it. So again, I don't want to speak on behalf of the board. I don't have any questions, but I really do thank so much for all of the comments that I've.
Okay, great. So why don't we turn to public comment? And we invite the public to address the subcommittee for up to 2 to 3 minutes, depending on how many people are going to be speaking. Under the Bagley-Keene Act, which governs our meetings, neither the board members nor the Department of Justice staff are required to respond. And we like to leave the space for you to share your comments, which become part of our minutes in our formal proceedings and get absorbed for future action. You can indicate your interest in speaking publicly by raising your hand in the Teams app and unmuting yourself if you're on the telephone, or writing a comment in the chat, or you can email after the meeting by emailing ab953@doj.ca.gov. So I will invite now anyone from Northern California who would like to speak. Please indicate your interest in speaking. Mr. Hilton, I see you hand your hand up, and I know you're in Southern California, so if you could just hold tight. Let's see if we've got anyone from Northern California who would like to speak. Is there anyone from Central California who would like to speak? Okay, well, we'll turn to Southern California. Mr. Hilton, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Richard Hilton, and I'm in San Diego. Reports are wonderful, but the best thing about them is when they have measurables, when they have metrics in them. As we go about looking at these young people, and we speak about the ages of them, what I know is that I'll never be able to validate or verify anything that appears in a report because I'll never get that data. With respect to reports that I've seen, I take you specifically to last year's report on multiracial people and how far off that was. And I applied that how far off to what I expect these numbers to be. Last year it was reported that 9 people, 9, the number 1 less than 10, existed as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I put it to you that the number was more like 1,000. In San Diego alone, there were more than 9. So data is everything. And when we speak about a bunch of numbers, use of force as an example, if you cannot measure the use of force number, I think you're wasting time. No? Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, Mr. Hilton. I see that Dr. Glover has made a comment. Karen Glover, if you would like to speak, say it out loud, that would be great.
Hi, folks. Thank you so much. This report, I think, is starting off pretty awesome. As someone who's been studying racial profiling for a while, I learned a lot from the report, and I really appreciate that. And it's disturbing information, no matter kind of what way we go towards trying to understand it. But my comment in the chat just was, again, the reliance on Lexipol for policy, and one of the ways that I always describe Lexipol is that it is primarily the policy is constructed by law enforcement for law enforcement. And if we want to be more community oriented, we might find different ways to do that. And then a final brief comment, if I could, is I'm wondering if y'all might, I know you want to stay in California, but I also understand that other folks are looking at what California does with this RIPA work. I'm wondering if you might invite Chuck Wexler from the Police Executive Research Forum. Chuck Wexler from the Police Executive Research Forum to join RIPA at some point. Thank you very much.
Okay, are there any other public comments? Okay, yeah, and just for clarity, the board is comprised of people who are described in the RIPA statute, and there are the legislature has outlined exactly who can be appointed to the RIPA board. So if you want to revisit that, you are welcome to take a look at the RIPA statute. Well, that concludes public comment. Any closing remarks from board members? And how about I just invite you in? So board member Sierra, any closing remarks?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I just agree. I think we're off to a really good start. I think this chapter is looking really good. It's like the last of a comment about how it's very disturbing information, but really important, very illuminating. And I think it's going to be really helpful to both law enforcement and to the public. So I'm very pleased of where we're at already at this stage. So I want to thank the team that's been working on this. They've done a great job.
Great. Board member Dobard, any closing thoughts?
I, as mentioned earlier, appreciate the structure and the direction that we're headed in. Eager to see more information, particularly around policies related to youth, and identify best practices that we think that are working to minimize negative impact.
Mm-hmm. Great. Board member Kajabi?
Yeah, I just want to, first of all, thank DOJ. I think it's great beginning to this year's report, and also our co-chairs for focusing on youth this year. I think this will make it a really powerful work, and won't get sort of lost in the volume of an ever-growing report. And I really appreciate all the points that everyone here, all the board members made today. Thank you.
Great. Board member Randolph?
For the first time in a long time, I just want to echo what everyone just said today. I felt like law enforcement, I think we are moving in a positive direction. And everything John said is I totally agree with. I think there's a lot of positive, good things going on right now. And I really would like us to start just kind of looking at that. So we're not continually going back and backwards in time. Thank you.
Mhm. Great. And my closing thoughts are that we are moving in a good direction. I echo my my fellow board members and thanking the DOJ for the they've done. One thought that I forgot to voice when we were reviewing the draft is the information about the unhoused youth, the intersection of unhoused and youth. I saw that we were beginning to provide information on that, and I believe it's the intention of DOJ to develop that some more, but that's an important intersection, especially as California faces an ever-rising number of unhoused individuals, many of whom are youth. It's going to be important to understand that intersection. In terms of next steps, the Department of Justice, as I understand it, will absorb all of our comments and we'll be working on a next draft to present us when we next meet. There is a full RIPA board meeting later this month on June 24th at 10 a.m. The notice and agenda link is in the chat if you want to take a look. And that will be a very exciting meeting because we will have guests who will come and share their experiences. So we hope that you are able to join us for that. That will be virtual. If you are available, there's also a post-board, a RIPA board post-training and recruitment subcommittee meeting tomorrow at 11 a.m. And that meeting notice and agenda is also in the chat if you would like to do that. As always, we appreciate the participation of the public, your comments and your presence help us develop the kind of reports that will inform policymakers and law enforcement officials, community members in the work that they do. So thank you so much. It's 2:10, and I think barring any other questions, we can invite a motion to adjourn this meeting. Anyone want to make that motion to adjourn this meeting?
I will move to adjourn the meeting.
Do I have
I'll second. Oh, go ahead.
Great. How about we just do a voice vote on this? Everyone who wants to adjourn, let's say aye.
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 Okay, great. Ooh. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and we'll see you at the next meeting.